Okay, so my name is Bertrand de La Chappelle. I have been an ICANN board member and previously the French thematic ambassador for Internet governance issues. And since 2012, I've launched this initiative called the Internet and Jurisdiction Project with a colleague. We're based in Paris. It's a global multi-stakeholder dialogue process that has engaged now more than 100 different entities, from governments, civil society, internet platforms, DNS operators, international organizations, and academia. And the goal is to address, as the name implies, the tension between the cross-border nature of the internet and the diversity of national jurisdictions, particularly on things that are related to content, because there are issues where content is legal in one country and not in another one. And there's an increased number of direct requests that are being sent by public authorities in one country to operators in another one regarding content that is legal or illegal. It can be for domain seizures, content takedown, and access to user identification. And the goal of this process is to help the different actors develop a due process framework that works across borders, a transnational due process framework, to organize the submission and the handling of those requests around a shared standardized format and, in a short way, agreed criteria for decision making. And so fundamentally you can qualify this as a sort of legal interoperability protocol, and it's a framework for establishing due process at the transnational level.
Right now, there doesn't seem to be any such framework. It seems clumsy and very difficult the way things are working. Authorities in one country seem to assume that they have, for example, access to data no matter where it's stored in the world. I'm thinking particularly about the Microsoft Department of Justice case at the moment, which is referring to a court order in the United States for data which is actually stored here in Ireland.
Yes.
There is a process there for that, but the authorities in the United States don't seem to want to use that.
The process you're referring to is called the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaties. One thing you need to understand is that the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty system is based on the fundamental principle that the thing is criminal or at least illegal on both sides. When you talk about content, this is not the case. So the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty system has several flaws. One is that it doesn't cover the type of issues that we're trying to address. And the other thing is that because it's usually bilateral, at best, if you have 190 countries and you want to scale up, it's about 13,000 agreements. So there's an effort to reform the MLAT system, and I won't get into the details of the Microsoft case, which is indeed a very important one, because we're dealing mostly with content. But it is interesting to highlight the Microsoft case because it is an illustration of what is happening today, which is de facto a legal and jurisdictional arms race. Because in the absence of international frameworks and international agreements, every single country is forced to use the tools that they have, which is their national law, and to try to extend it extraterritorially as much as possible. And so if we want to avoid this, which is actually making the problem harder to solve, we need to have multi-stakeholder discussions to develop rules of engagement and procedural agreements that do not necessarily look for harmonization, but on substance, but look for harmonization or interoperability of processes. Today, there is too much uncertainty, and for people who are running businesses, and particularly who are running across borders, this uncertainty is very damaging. We're talking about fragmentation of the internet as if it were a threat. It's actually a reality in the legal system. The reason why we feel that things are not going in the right direction is because we were living under the assumption that there was a sort of unification of cyberspace, because in most cases early on, the terms of service of the companies based in the US were establishing the US jurisdiction as the jurisdiction of reference. This is not sustainable anymore, and we're now struggling in finding, not necessarily in the traditional way of conflict of law, whether it's law A or law B that applies. In many cases, we need to organize the coexistence of different laws in shared online spaces. And so one of the dangers with the Microsoft case or with the Trend case is that we may very well end up with decisions on both sides of the Atlantic, to take those two cases, where the Supreme Court in the US and whatever supreme authority at the European level will have different interpretations, and then we get into a real tension between two systemic legal orders. So in order to prevent this, and I know that the OECD is having a conference, a ministerial conference next year in Mexico, on a certain number of issues, including the openness and preserving the free flow of information and data and so on across borders. If we want to keep cyberspace as a free-to-roam space, we need to solve this problem of jurisdiction. We're doing it modestly on one item, which is those specific contents that might be legal in one country and not legal in another one. But the more it goes, the more I believe that the methodology and the problematic is actually scalable and that it can apply to other types of issues if we can manage to prove that it works there. Finally, there's an important distinction which has been alluded to by Fadi Shehadeh, the CEO of ICANN, in his introductory presentation. If you look at the internet and cyberspace as layers, you get the infrastructure layer, you get the logical layer, and all the rest, which is applications and users. It is extremely important to preserve the neutrality of the logical layer, and in this regard, ICANN is not supposed to be dealing with content issues. The problem is, if nothing else outside is dealing with content issues, the pressure will come on ICANN and we will all lose. So it is necessary to facilitate the generation of initiatives like the one we're running on an issue-by-issue basis, to gather the relevant stakeholders around the issue and help them develop voluntary solutions that are voluntary regimes that are not self-regulation in the traditional sense, because the governments need to be involved, but it's not guidelines by civil society and it's not treaties. It's what we have a tendency to call a policy standard. And that's basically we need to find new modes of transnational cooperation or new modes of cooperation that are as transnational as the internet itself.